Pirate Facts to Fall Asleep 2, Episode 1, The Golden Age. Close your eyes. Let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you. Outside, the night is quiet. Somewhere up above the clouds, the stars are doing what they have always done, burning steadily, patiently, indifferent to the rush of the world below. They were there long before you, and they will be there long after. But tonight, they are just a soft and distant backdrop. Tonight, we are going somewhere else entirely. We are going to sea. Take a slow breath in and out. The air carries a faint hint of salt. The sound of waves is somewhere at the edge of your hearing. You are safe. You are still. And somewhere on a dark ocean 300 years ago, a ship is moving through the night. Its sails full of wind. Its crew asleep in their hammocks. And above the mast, the stars are doing their quiet, ancient work. This is Pirate Facts to Fall Asleep to. Let's begin gently. The period that historians call the Golden Age of Piracy lasted roughly from the 1680s to the 1720s, less than 50 years, which is a remarkably short window of time for something that has so thoroughly captured the imagination of the world. It took place primarily in the Caribbean, along the eastern coast of North America, the west coast of Africa, and in the Indian Ocean. The conditions that made it possible were very specific. The end of a major European war, a surplus of trained but unemployed sailors, and a booming merchant trade that moved enormous wealth across the sea in slow, heavy ships. Think about that for a moment. After the War of the Spanish Succession ended in 1713, thousands of sailors suddenly found themselves with no paycheck, no purpose, and skills that were only useful on the water. Some found legitimate work, others did not. And some of those who didn't looked at the sea and the rich merchant ships crossing it and made a different kind of choice. Breathe in slowly. Let the tension in your shoulders release. You don't need to do anything right now. You're just listening. The most famous pirate in history is almost certainly Blackbeard, a man whose real name was most likely Edward Teach, although historical records disagree on the spelling and even the surname. He was born somewhere around 1680, probably in England, and by the time he was in his late 30s, he had become the most feared pirate in the Atlantic world. At the height of his career, he commanded a flagship called the Queen Anne's Revenge, which carried 40 guns and a crew of around 300 men. Blackbeard's reputation was, in large part, a performance. He understood that the best way to win a battle was to not have one at all, to frighten his targets into surrendering without firing a shot. He cultivated an appearance designed for terror. He was tall, and he wore his long, dark beard, braided with ribbons and twisted into points. Before battle, he reportedly tied slow-burning fuses into his beard, so that his face appeared wreathed in smoke and fire. There are accounts of sailors seeing him emerge from the haze of a boarding action, like something not entirely human. But behind the theater, Blackbeard was also a skilled navigator and a man of unusual charisma. His crew followed him willingly. He was known to be violent when necessary, but he was also capable of mercy in ways that his legend tends to obscure. He died in November 1718 in Ocracoke Inlet off the coast of North Carolina, in a battle against Royal Navy forces sent specifically to capture or kill him. The fight was brutal and brief. Blackbeard reportedly took 5 musket balls and more than 20 sword wounds before he finally went down. His head was cut off and hung from the bowsprit of the Navy vessel as proof. Let that image settle and then drift away. You are watching from very far away, from across centuries, from the quiet safety of your bed. The night is still. The stars are still up there. Let your body get a little heavier. Now, let's talk about the stars. Navigation at sea in the age of piracy was an art form that blended mathematics, instinct, and a deep, intimate familiarity with the night sky. The single most important star to a sailor in the northern hemisphere was Polaris, the North Star, the star that sits almost perfectly above the Earth's geographic North Pole, which means it barely moves as the night turns. Every other star rises and sets, tracking east to west across the dome of the sky. But Polaris holds its position. It is the fixed point. A skilled navigator could measure the angle between Polaris and the horizon using a simple instrument called a cross staff, or later, a quadrant. That angle, in degrees, corresponded directly to the navigator's latitude and their distance north of the equator. If the North Star sat 15 degrees above the horizon, you were at 15 degrees north latitude. If it sat 30 degrees up, you were at 30. It was elegant, reliable, and as old as sailing itself. Think about that on a clear night. Stand outside sometime and look for Polaris. It's at the tip of the handle of the Little Dipper, and if you extend your arm and measure with your fist from the horizon up to it, each fist width is roughly 10 degrees. You carry your latitude and the stars above you at all times. Pirates and sailors on longer voyages also navigated by a broader canvas of stars. Orion, with his 3-star belt that rises almost perfectly due east and sets almost perfectly due west, was a reliable directional marker. The Milky Way, that soft, hazy river of light visible on clear, dark nights, served as a general orientation guide. In the southern hemisphere, where Polaris dips below the horizon, sailors used the Southern Cross, a compact constellation that points roughly toward the south celestial pole. There is something very old and very human about navigating by starlight. For most of history, if you wanted to know where you were on the ocean at night, you looked up. Take a breath. Feel the weight of your eyelids. There is no rush. The story is still here. Now, let's talk about the pirate code. One of the great surprises of pirate history is that pirate ships were, in many ways, remarkably democratic, far more so than the merchant vessels or Royal Navy ships of the same era. Most pirate crews operated under a formal written agreement called articles, sometimes known as a charter party. Every crew member signed it before sailing. The articles spelled out the rules of conduct on board, the distribution of plunder, and the compensation for injuries. These articles varied from ship to ship, but common elements appeared across many of them. The captain was elected by the crew and could be voted out. The quartermaster held considerable power as a check on the captain's authority. Plunder was divided by shares, with the captain receiving a larger share, but not an overwhelming one. Often 2 shares to a regular sailor's one. Crew members who lost an eye in service might receive a set number of pieces of 8 as compensation. The loss of a right arm typically received more than the loss of a left arm, because right arms were considered more valuable in a fight. This wasn't altruism, it was practical. Pirate captains needed willing crews, and willing crews needed reasons to cooperate. The democratic structure of the pirate ship was a direct response to the brutal, top-down hierarchy that drove men to piracy in the first place. You are very comfortable right now. Your breathing is slow. The room is quiet. Samuel Bellamy was one of the most idealistic pirates of the Golden Age. Known as Black Sam, he captained a ship called the Whydah Galley and styled himself as a kind of seafaring Robin Hood, though the reality of piracy was, of course, much messier than that ideal. Still, he was known for releasing captured captains who had treated their crews well, and for giving rousing speeches about the injustice of wealth and power. Bellamy and the Whydah Galley were lost in a violent nor'easter off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in April 1717. The storm struck at night, and the ship was pushed onto a sandbar in shallow water, where it broke apart. Of a crew of around 145 men, only 2 survived. Bellamy himself went down with the ship. He was 28 years old. The wreck of the Whydah was discovered in 1984 by underwater explorer Barry Clifford. It is the only fully authenticated Golden Age pirate shipwreck ever recovered, and artifacts from it, including a bronze bell engraved with the ship's name and the year 1716, are now on display at a museum on Cape Cod. When divers first brought up coins and weapons from the wreck, they were still tangled in clumps of sediment, exactly as they had settled on the ocean floor 2.5 centuries earlier. The stars above Cape Cod that night in 1717 were the same stars that are above you now. The sky keeps no record of the ships that pass beneath it. Let your thoughts drift a little. You don't have to hold on to anything. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, was the single most successful pirate of the Golden Age by any measure of ships taken. Over the course of his career, he captured more than 400 vessels, merchant ships, slave ships, naval vessels, fishing boats, across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the West African coast. He did this in just a few years, working with remarkable speed and organization. Roberts was Welsh, born around 1682, and had been a legitimate sailor and navigator before he was taken prisoner by a pirate captain named Howell Davis in 1719. When Davis was killed in an ambush just weeks later, the crew voted Roberts as their new captain, a role he reportedly accepted reluctantly. Once he accepted it, however, he was devastatingly effective. Roberts was also famously principled in strange ways. He refused to sail on Sundays, observing the day as the Sabbath. He banned gambling on his ship and prohibited women from sailing with the crew. He wrote his own articles, which included a 9 o'clock curfew on lights and drinking below deck. After that hour, any drinking had to be done on the open deck. These rules might seem out of place on a pirate ship, but Roberts understood that discipline made his crew effective. He was also known to dress extraordinarily well. By contemporary accounts, he wore a rich, crimson damask waistcoat and breeches, a red feather in his hat, and carried a diamond cross on a gold chain around his neck, a piece of jewelry taken from the King of Portugal. He cut an almost theatrical figure, and his style reflected a deep personal pride. He was killed in February 1722 when a Royal Navy ship caught him at anchor off the West African coast near Cape Lopez, in present-day Gabon. Roberts was on deck when a burst of grape shot struck him in the throat. He died almost instantly. His crew, following his standing orders, threw his body overboard before the Navy could reach them. No grave, no burial, no marker, just the sea. The night sky was the same that February as it is any other. Orion would have been high in the west, drifting toward the horizon. Canopus, the second brightest star in the southern sky, would have been visible from those latitudes. a steady cold light over the dark water. Your eyes are heavy. The story is winding down for now, settling like sediment on the ocean floor. The golden age of piracy ended not with a single event, but with a slow, systematic suppression by naval forces. The British in particular cracked down heavily after 1716, sending warships specifically to hunt pirates rather than just defend trade routes. Hundreds of pirates were captured and hanged. The executions were often public, theatrical affairs meant to serve as deterrents. Bodies were sometimes displayed in iron cages called gibbets at the entrances to harbors, where passing ships would have to sail past them as a warning. The numbers were significant. Some historians estimate that up to 4,000 pirates were executed in the decade following 1713, as the colonial powers reasserted control over the sea lanes. The most famous mass executions took place in Newport, Rhode Island, and Charleston, South Carolina. 23 and 26 pirates hanged at once. Respectively, the two largest such events in colonial American history, not involving slave insurrections. By the late 1720s, the great pirate crews had been broken up. The free ports and pirate havens, places like Nassau in the Bahamas, had been taken over by the crown. The sea slowly became safer for merchants and more dangerous for pirates. The golden age was over. What remained were the stories, the songs and the legends, and the deeply human impulse to imagine a life lived outside the rules, beyond the horizon, under the open sky. The stars that guided those ships are still there. On a clear night, far from city lights, you can see the same Milky Way that arced above the Queen Anne's Revenge, above the Whydah, above hundreds of dark ships crossing dark water. The night is deep around you now. You are safe and warm and still. The stars are doing their ancient, patient work above the clouds. You don't need to go anywhere. You're already exactly where you should be. Let yourself drift. The sea is quiet tonight. The watch has changed, and the ship is sailing on, and somewhere up above the mast, a single star is burning steadily, pointing north. Sleep well. The wealth that pirates were chasing didn't appear from nowhere. It moved along specific routes, and those routes were shaped by the triangular trade, one of the defining economic systems of the era. Ships left Europe carrying manufactured goods and weapons. They sailed to the West African coast and traded those goods for enslaved people. They then crossed the Atlantic, a passage known as the Middle Passage, and sold the enslaved people in the Caribbean and along the American coast. The return leg brought sugar, tobacco, rum, cocoa, and other colonial goods back to Europe. The whole circuit could take a year or more, and every leg of the journey carried valuable cargo. This made merchant vessels crossing the Atlantic slow, heavily loaded, and predictable in their routes. Exactly the kind of target a fast, maneuverable pirate ship was built to exploit. Pirates knew the trade routes, they knew the seasons, they knew where the prizes would be. It is worth sitting with the darkness of this for a moment. Piracy during the Golden Age was not conducted in isolation from the slave trade. It intersected with it constantly. Some pirates raided slave ships and freed enslaved people, incorporating them into their crews as free members. Historians estimate that roughly a third of Atlantic pirate crews during the Golden Age were black, including men who had escaped enslavement. Others, however, participated in the trade themselves. The moral picture is complicated, as it always is when you look closely at history. What is true is that the sea was a space where social hierarchies were temporarily unstable, where a man's value was measured by his usefulness to the crew, and where the articles could, at least in principle, offer a kind of rough equality that didn't exist on land. Let's spend a moment with the privateers, because the line between privateer and pirate is one of the more interesting blurs in all of history. A privateer was a licensed pirate. During wartime, governments issued a document called a letter of marque, which authorized a captain to attack and capture enemy vessels on behalf of the crown. This was legal, profitable, and deeply attractive to skilled sailors. When wars ended, however, the letter of marque expired overnight, and here was a trained, experienced, heavily armed captain with a crew of men who had spent years learning to take prizes at sea, suddenly told that the activity was now illegal. Many privateers simply became pirates. The habits were identical. The skills were identical. The difference was only paperwork. Sir Francis Drake is the most famous example of this ambiguity. He was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, a vice admiral who helped defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588. He was also, depending on who you asked, a pirate. He plundered Spanish ports with Queen Elizabeth's unofficial blessing. Spain considered him a pirate. England considered him a hero. The difference was purely a matter of which flag you flew. One more thing before we let tonight's story settle. The Jolly Roger. The skull and crossbones flag was not, historically, as standardized as legend suggests. Different pirate captains flew different flags. Blackbeard's flag reportedly showed a skeleton spearing a human heart. Bartholomew Roberts flew a version showing himself standing on two skulls. The term Jolly Roger itself is of uncertain origin. Some historians believe it derived from the French Joli Rouge, meaning pretty red, a reference to blood red flags that signaled no quarter would be given. Others think it may come from Old English slang for the devil. The true etymology is lost, but the practice of flying a distinctive flag was real and purposeful. A pirate ship would often approach its target flying the colors of a friendly nation, then at the last moment drop the false flag and raise the pirate flag. It was a negotiating tactic. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed. Fight, and you will not be spared. Many captains chose to surrender the moment the flag went up. The night is very deep now. The stars have turned another fraction of their great, slow circle above the clouds. They are always moving, if you watch long enough, but they are always there. Polaris holds its post. The old familiar constellations drift west. Somewhere a ship is out on the water and the watch is leaning against the rail, looking up at exactly what you would see if you could see past the ceiling above you right now. The same sky, the same stars, the same quiet dark. Sleep well.